used to live in this old apartment when I was younger. It was really an old house that was converted into a duplex, I guess. I had a kitchen, living room, bedroom, and bathroom. Then there was a staircase going down to a very small entryway and the door. The other side, I guess, had basically the same thing, but I didn't know who lived there or anything. So I lived in this apartment for several months. It was cheap and pretty close to my work. Other than that, it was nothing special. I never knew anything strange to happen over the course of the first month that I lived there. I pretty much would be at work a lot, but when I was home I never had any problems. But then there were a few nights where I realized I was waking up in the middle of the night. I just know that I woke up and then went back to sleep pretty much right away one time. Then, another time, I woke up to what I thought was a noise, but I didn't hear anything more after waking up. I remember sitting up in bed and listening closely, but did not hear anything at all. So eventually, I just went back to sleep. This was strange because I normally slept really well and never woke up in the night. These were situations that I didn't even necessarily remember during the next day. But then when I woke up in the middle of the night for a third time in about a week, I was sure I heard a noise and I found it really strange. Once more, I sat up and listened, but I didn't hear any more noises. I couldn't figure out if I was dreaming the noise or if it happened when I was awake. It just seemed pretty strange. But after a while of nothing again, I finally fell back asleep. I wasn't really sure what was going on or what was the cause of me waking up. But then, one of the very next nights, I remember that I woke up again. I don't really remember hearing any noises, but I also was like wide awake immediately after waking up, which was weird. I didn't sit up, but rolled over to my other side. I was looking in the rest of the room, which was completely dark, but I then heard a small creaking sound. It was as if my bedroom door was being opened slowly. I looked over and saw that it was. Then I saw somebody suddenly enter the room from the doorway. It was a man, but I couldn't make out any details. The guy took a step into the room, but did not advance any farther. I was literally too scared to move. It was so dark that I'm not sure if he knew I was awake or not. The man then took out some sort of camera and took a picture of me. Then he disappeared back behind the doorway, going into the hall. I honestly couldn't believe it. I didn't know what on earth was happening. Then I heard some creaking from the floor in the hallway, and I heard a noise like a door being opened and closed. It was quiet but noticeable. After that, everything went completely silent again. I sat in bed without hearing anything for probably the next 10 or 20 minutes. I wasn't sure if I was being robbed or what, but I hadn't heard any noises in a long time. I finally got up and walked around my bedroom. There still was no other sounds, and then I left and went out into the hallway. I turned on a light and did not see or hear anything. Then I went around every room slowly and looked around. My place really wasn't that big, so it didn't take me long to realize that the other person was gone. But when I got to the end of the hallway upstairs, past my bedroom and across from a closet, I realized what must have happened. There was a door leading to my next door neighbors. However, this door I was told was not in use and was always locked. It even had a small table with a lamp on it in front of it, and the door was painted the same color as the wall, so it wasn't really that noticeable. But I knew that had to be where the person had gone. For some reason, the door must not be locked on the other side. After that, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up the rest of the night. In the morning, as soon as I was able to, I contacted the management from my place. I reported what was happening, and I started looking for another apartment immediately. The next few nights, I stayed at a friend's. Long story short, there was a man who lived next door, and he was caught. I'm happy that he never got in my place again after that. The times I had been waking up must have been when he left to go back to his place, possibly when he was closing the door. I will never forget seeing him in my room. It was the creepiest situation that's ever happened to me. When I was about 8 years old, I remember that I took a train one time with my older sister. She would have been 15, I think, and we were going to visit our grandparents. It was just us two, and we were just going for the weekend. Our grandparents lived a few hours away, but there was a train route that went from our city to theirs. My sister and I liked trains, so we wanted to take the train there, and our parents agreed. I remember that we first got to the train station in our city, and it was pretty busy there. Soon we boarded the train and got into our seats. The ride was pretty smooth, and we sat by the windows and watched things go by. I would say that the train was almost completely full with passengers. When we arrived in our grandparents' city, we got off the train along with most of the other people. Some of them were staying to go to the next stop though. So my sister and I walked into the train station, and I guess our grandparents were not there yet to pick us up. As we waited, my sister said that she was going to use the restroom. I didn't have to go, so my sister walked off and I kept standing there. I looked around the station, and it was very busy with lots of other people around. After about 2 minutes or so, I remembered that this woman approached me. I didn't know who she was, but she pointed out to the train and said that my sister was boarding it. I figured that we had to go back on the train, and this wasn't our stop, so I started to walk over. The woman then went with me to the train, and we both started to get back on. Now, to this point, I had just kind of been following my sister. I was young, and I didn't know exactly which stop was ours or which city we were even in. I just figured that I hadn't seen my sister after she had come out of the bathroom. So I actually got back onto the train and then went back to my seat, but I didn't see my sister there. I was confused, so at that point I started looking around the train thinking maybe she switched seats. The woman who was with me was sitting in the next row over. I didn't ask her where exactly my sister had gone or anything. Instead, I was just silently looking around. After about a minute, I actually saw my sister. She was walking just outside of the station and seemed to be looking around, probably for me. I got up and started to walk for the doors of the train. When I stood, the woman also stood up and asked me where I was going. I told her that my sister was not on the train, and I started walking away. The woman did not say anything back to me. She also didn't go after me or anything. I left the train and then walked over to my sister. I was very confused at this point. But when I reached my sister, she asked me what on earth I was doing back on the train. I told her how the lady told me she had been on, and I figured that we had to take the train to another city. My sister told me that we were in the city that our grandparents lived in, and she didn't know what that lady was talking about. I realized at that point that I may have avoided something bad. The train left a very short time after that, and we got picked up by my grandparents. Looking back at that, I'm really glad that I saw my sister and got off the train when I did. The house my husband and I have lived in for a while now has an Airbnb next door as neighbors. It has been operating for close to a year now as an Airbnb. My husband and I often noticed the guests coming and going. Most of them would stay to themselves, and a few would talk to us, but they were all nice people. However, one night in late September, we encountered some creepy guests who were staying at the Airbnb. It was a warm evening, and we were settling down to watch a movie when I noticed movement outside. I glanced out the window and saw a younger-looking couple in the Airbnb's backyard. They seemed to be setting up something odd with candles and laying other things down on the ground. I showed my husband, and we both agreed that it was strange. Our best guess was they were setting up some sort of ritual. However weird it was, everyone has their own unique hobbies, and who were we to judge what they wanted to do with their time at the Airbnb? We watched them for a while, unable to tear our eyes away. Firstly, it was just fun to watch, but also, we wanted to make sure that nothing extremely creepy was going on. They took a while to set up, so eventually we got bored and went back to watching our movie. Before going to bed, I checked out the window to see if the young couple was still out there. They still appeared to be just hanging out with whatever stuff they had set up, so I dismissed it and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I was gradually awoken by sounds coming through our bedroom window that was open for air. I could hear soft murmurs outside, low and rhythmic. I glanced at the clock, which showed that it was past 2 a.m. now. I woke up my husband, and we went to check out why the neighbors were still up at this time. We got out of bed and made our way to the back of the house and looked out the back window towards the backyards. Surprisingly, this time the young couple was in our backyard, standing and making strange movements in the flickering candlelight. It appeared they were doing whatever ritual thing they had set up earlier. What was even stranger was there were some lights in the woods, which were way out on the property away from our house. I guess the couple had set up some candles way out in the woods as well, but I wasn't sure. It didn't make sense. Somehow, it felt scarier to go outside and confront the couple about being on our property, rather than just let them continue what they were doing. We double-checked the house, locking all our doors and windows just in case before going back to bed. The next morning when we woke up, we cautiously walked into our backyard, checking to see if anything was damaged. It looked like the couple from the Airbnb had already left, since their car was gone. Everything was normal in our backyard, thankfully, besides a note that we found in the middle of the lawn pinned down by a rock. I bent down and picked up the small piece of paper and unfolded it to read it. It read, "Thank you for your participation. You have been blessed. Nothing major happened to us in our yard that night, but it was just really creepy in general. We left a message with the owner of the Airbnb, recommending not to let that young couple stay in again in the future if they tried to." It was a Friday night, and my friends and I decided to hang out at the park. We were bored, and the night felt perfect for some fresh air. Around 10 p.m., we heard a car approaching. It was slow, the headlights cutting through the darkness. At first, we didn't think much of it, but then we noticed it was moving towards us. As it got closer, we could see that it was an old beat-up sedan with the windows tinted, so we couldn't see who was inside. "Probably just somebody passing through," I said, trying to shrug it off. But as soon as it got closer, the car stopped right in front of us. We looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The engine idled, and the driver's side window rolled down. Staring out the window that had just been rolled down was a clown, complete with a painted face and wild hair. He had a wide grin that looked more unsettling than friendly. "What's up, kids?" he shouted, his voice high-pitched, and he asked us if we needed a ride. We all exchanged nervous glances. Nobody said anything, and we just hoped that he would drive away. There was something off about him, his smile and the way his eyes seemed to be darting around. The clown called out to us again, saying, "Come on, don't be shy." My friend Sarah was the first one to say anything, as she whispered to us that we should leave, her voice shaking. She stood up, and we all followed her lead, backing away from the bench. "Wait, where are you going?" the clown asked, still grinning. "I'm just trying to be friendly," he said. We turned and ran towards the nearest exit of the park. I looked back once, and the clown was still sitting there, his smile now more sinister. We didn't stop running until we reached my house. Out of breath, we piled into the living room, slamming the door behind us. We tried to laugh it off, but the mood had shifted. We were all on edge, checking the windows to make sure that the clown wasn't following us. We eventually relaxed a bit and put on a movie. Hours passed, and at around 1 a.m. after the movie was over, my friends began to leave one by one. After the last one left, I locked the door and turned off the lights. I settled onto the couch, thinking I might finally get some sleep. But then I heard a faint sound outside, an engine slowly driving up the street. I walked quietly to the window and peeked through the blinds. There it was, the same old sedan from earlier, and the window rolled down with that same clown staring straight at my house. His face was illuminated by the dashboard lights, and his grin seemed wider than before. He just sat there, motionless, as if waiting for me to make a move. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself or risk being seen. I stayed away from the window, pacing in the dark. The engine continued to run, and I could hear the faint sound of some circus tune music playing. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I didn't want to look, but curiosity gnawed at me, so I moved back to the window to take a look outside. I could see the clown now tapping his fingers against the steering wheel, still wearing that disturbing grin. Suddenly, he turned his head towards my window, as if sensing I was watching. My heart stopped, and I ducked down quickly, wondering if he had seen me. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the car door slam. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of footsteps. But instead, I heard the engine rev and the car speed off into the night. That image of the car and clown inside scared me for a while, and for the next couple weeks I was paranoid, always checking around me if it was nearby, especially at night. Each year when I was a kid, we would celebrate New Year's Eve and stay up late. Normally, I would go to bed at about 10 o'clock, but on New Year's Eve, I would stay up until around 2 a.m. My sister and my parents and I would play board games and watch movies. We would then watch the ball drop when it was midnight, and would stay up for several more hours. I think this happened when I was about 12 years old. That time, like any other, we played games and watched a couple of movies. This continued well past midnight, and at roughly 2 a.m., we all got tired and finally decided to go to bed. We could sleep in the next day because nobody had work or school. Our house was on a pretty quiet street. Other than that, it was a pretty typical neighborhood. I stayed up a little bit later than everybody else that night because I was watching a movie in the living room. When it ended, I finally went to bed. I remember getting back into my bedroom and turning out the lights. When I did, I could see very clearly into the front yard because of the moonlight. There was a woman standing in our yard. She was not facing me, and I didn't recognize her. I walked over to the window, and when I did, the woman turned and faced me. She saw me and then started to walk closer into my direction. This really creeped me out. Nobody was supposed to be in our front yard. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I moved away from the window and hid. I ducked down and laid on the floor so that she couldn't see me. My window was pretty large, and I did not have a cover on it at the time. Now, my bedroom was also on the second floor, so she couldn't directly reach me, but I was still terrified. I waited there, just hoping that she would go away. A few minutes went by. Then I heard something hit my window. I wasn't sure as to what it was. I started watching my window, and something else hit it. The woman was throwing sticks at it. She was trying to get my attention, and I don't know why, but I got up. I carefully looked out of the window again. The woman was still there and looking right up at me, this time closer. She said something, but I couldn't hear her. Then I saw her motioning for me to let her inside. I was not going to do that. She then walked to the side of the yard near the front door. Then she knocked on the front door. I didn't move. I was hoping that my parents or sister would wake up. I didn't have the thought to call the police for some reason. It just never entered my mind. The woman knocked on the door on and off for like 5 minutes. Finally, she walked away. I watched her from the window walk to the end of the driveway and then a little ways down. She then got inside of a vehicle and drove off. The whole situation was really bizarre, and it really confused me. The next morning, I told my parents about it. They had no idea what she could have been doing either. Luckily, though, she never came back. I was selling a desk on Facebook Marketplace a few years ago. It was a pretty nice desk in my opinion, and I had bought it from ICA just 2 years prior. However, I was going to be moving and I decided to get rid of it. During this time, I lived in a smaller house by myself. I remember that after I made the listing for the desk, it took a couple of days before I got any responses. When I did, I got a message from a man named Charlie. He said that he wanted to buy the desk. There wasn't a whole lot of conversation between us other than that. I was happy that somebody wanted to buy it, and I made sure that he was good with the price, which he said that he was. I thought the price was reasonable, so I was glad to hear that, and then I gave him my address. We agreed that he would come by the next evening at about 5 o'clock. And when the next evening rolled around, I had the desk just inside of my front door for Charlie to come and buy. He got there at about 5, and I let him inside of my house. Charlie was skinny with somewhat curly blondish hair. He was wearing a sweatshirt. After we said hi to each other, I showed Charlie the desk and I told him that I could help him take it to his car. Charlie went up close to the desk and looked at it. After a short time, he told me that the desk did not look like it did in the pictures. I asked him what he meant. I was very confused because it was exactly the same as the pictures. I had taken them just days prior when I had listed the desk, and I really hadn't touched it since. Charlie said that it just wasn't how he thought it would be. Then he said that he decided not to buy it. I was disappointed, but I said okay. Then he turned and left. I was confused by what he had said. I'm not sure what exactly he was expecting, because in my opinion, the desk was just as it was advertised in the listing. I decided to just move on, and hopefully somebody else would want to buy it. So the night went on, and I ended up staying up pretty late. It was nearly midnight. I was in the other room, and I heard the sound suddenly of somebody trying to open the front door. When I heard this, I walked over and looked out of a front window. I saw a man standing there, wearing a hat that was mostly covering his face. But I then realized that this was Charlie. I didn't know what he was doing. After literally trying to open my front door, he then walked away, but he didn't leave. Instead, he walked around to the back side of the house. He tried that door, which thankfully was locked. After that, things were quiet for a bit. Then he returned to the front. This time, he actually knocked on the front door of the house, but I was not going to answer it. After being at the front door, he moved to several windows. It seemed like he was trying to look inside. I had covers for most of them, but I could still see his shadow on the other side. After he was still in my yard prowling around for that long, I decided to call the police. I told them the whole story, and within 10 minutes, an officer was there. Meanwhile, Charlie had stayed there the whole time. When the police arrived, he tried running, but was quickly caught. He did not break in, and I think he ended up getting off for the most part. I have to think, though, that he was trying to find a good place to break into my house. I'm really glad that he didn't. I'm one of those people that's always getting a new phone. I get one almost every year. For me, it's just a personal preference. A lot of times, I trade in my old phone for a new one, but that's not always the case. I happened to just buy a new iPhone a while back, but I still had my old one, so I decided to sell it on Facebook Marketplace. The phone was still pretty new, and I figured that somebody would want it. I listed it for a reasonable price, and within a day, someone had made me an offer. I sold it to them, and after receiving payment, I shipped it to the buyer, which was a man named Elliot. Now, everything seems normal, and it was. He got the phone, and I thought that was the end of that. But maybe like a week later, I got a friend request on Facebook from Elliot, the buyer of the phone. I didn't know him at all, other than that he bought my phone. I clicked on his profile, and I knew that he lived in the same state, in a city that was like an hour or two away. When I clicked on his profile, though, there wasn't all that much information because we weren't friends. I thought that it was kind of weird, though, so I declined his request. The next day, he sent me a message. He asked me why I declined his request and said that he really wanted to be friends with me. I told him, "I just sold you the phone. I don't know you at all other than that. Please don't take it personally. I just don't know you." He kept sending me messages, though. He called me some things that I will not repeat here, and he seemed pretty angry. At that point, I blocked him. It was really strange to say the least, but I thought that was the end of it. Now, Elliot did not contact me through Facebook or any other social media for that matter after that. What he did was much worse. This is something really bizarre that happened to me last winter. I live by myself in a smaller one-story home. The neighborhood that I live in is somewhat typical. However, I know most of the nearby neighbors pretty well and get along with all of them. Last winter, we got a pretty bad snowstorm at one point. It was over a weekend, and it started one night at roughly 5 o'clock. The snow was supposed to last until early the next morning, and we were going to get several inches of it. Everything was normal other than the snowstorm, and I went to bed at about 11 p.m. and then woke up the next morning at probably like 7:30 or 8. My bedroom is at the front side of the house, and as soon as I sat up and looked out of the window, something shocked me. There was a snowman that was built and looking right into my bedroom window. The snowman was very well done and had eyes and a mouth made from buttons. It was probably about 5 feet away from my window. It spooked me at first until I realized what it was. But then, I wondered how it got there. I certainly hadn't made it. It had to have been my next-door neighbor's kids. My next-door neighbors were a husband and wife who had kids in their early teens and middle school ages. They were the only kids in the immediate area of the neighborhood. Still, it seemed kind of unlike them to do that. Why wouldn't they just build it in their own yard? Plus, they were usually well-behaved, and I didn't think that they would even go into my yard without permission. I went outside to snowplow my driveway. When I got out there, I saw my next-door neighbor. His name is Todd, and he was already out using his snowblower. I walked over to him at the end of the driveway and waved. He stopped his snowblower and said that I had a nice snowman in the front yard. I told him that I didn't know how it got there and asked him if his kids had made it. He said no. He told me he had been inside with his kids watching a movie the night before. He assumed that I had made the snowman. We just joked about it after that, though. It was a pretty funny thing, but also a little bit strange. After that, I finished clearing my driveway and went back inside. The temperatures that we were having were in the high 20s all the way up to the mid-30s. This created good snowball or snowman snow. Fast forward to the next morning, I woke up and then went into the kitchen. The kitchen is at the back side of my house, and there's a window out to the backyard. When I looked out of it, there was another snowman. It hadn't been there the day before, and it was facing the back window, looking right at me just a few feet away. Somebody had made another one. This one, like the first, was very well made, but unlike the other one, it had some different props. Instead of just having a face made out of buttons, it had a gardening shovel used as its hand, and it was made to look like it was holding a pitchfork. I realized that the shovel and pitchfork had come from my garage. I went outside and then went to the garage. The back door was left open. Nobody was inside of it though. I was really creeped out now. Somebody was going into my yard in the middle of the night and making snowmen. This time they had entered my garage. I had left the door unlocked by accident, and I made sure to lock it. When whoever it was made a snowman in the front yard, I thought it was funny. But now that it was in the backyard and they went inside of my garage without permission, this was too far. Still, I had no idea who was doing it. At night, I never heard or saw anything. That night, I even looked out of the windows multiple times before going to bed. I didn't see anybody though. The next morning when I got up, both of the snowmen were destroyed. They were just gone and nowhere to be seen. Somebody had tore them down. I was really weirded out by the whole situation. After that, there were no more strange occurrences though. No more snowmen and no more strange things happening. I still wonder to this day who did that. A couple of years ago, my phone broke. It had been pretty old, and I was sort of meaning to get a new one. But after breaking, I had to find a new one fast. I thought about going to the store or looking online. But to try to save some money, I went on Facebook Marketplace. I also wanted to get one as fast as possible. I had heard there were a lot of good cell phones there for cheap. After maybe 30 minutes of looking, I found one. It was the same phone that I had before, but a few generations newer. The price also seemed very cheap compared to what it would be elsewhere. So at that point, I decided to send the seller a message saying that I wanted to buy the phone. Now, the seller's Facebook account was pretty mysterious. Their name was just JM. I clicked on their profile, and they did not have a profile picture. There wasn't much information about them either. Still, I didn't think that was too big of a deal, and I contacted them. It did not take long before I heard back. The seller, Jay, I guess, told me that I could buy the phone as soon as that night, and I agreed. I suggested that we meet at a local shopping center. However, Jay said they could not do that because they had kids and could not leave their house. Instead, I was supposed to come over that night. I said okay, and I agreed to it. I understood that people with kids probably wouldn't be able to just go whenever. So I was given an address, and that night I drove to it. It took maybe 15 minutes to get there. It was a little bit far away in an area that I had never been before. When I got to the address, I saw that it was a house that looked slightly run down, and there didn't appear to be any lights on inside. The whole neighborhood looked a little bit run down, and the houses had fairly large properties. I had no way of texting the seller that I was there because of my phone being broken, but I had my watch, and I was right on time for when we agreed. So I walked up to the front step and rang the doorbell. After maybe 30 seconds, the door started to open. There were two doors, a screen door and then an actual one. The inside door opened just a few inches, and I saw a woman was standing behind it. She told me to go around to the back and then close the door. So I walked around to behind the house and then entered a back door there. This led into a dimly lit kitchen area. The woman was there inside and sitting at a table. I entered and then sat down across from her. It appeared as though every light in the rest of the house was off. We both just sat there in awkward silence for a few moments. Then I mentioned the phone, saying I would like to buy it. The woman said that she would go and get the phone and got up. I kept sitting at the table. She left the room and I waited at the table. The whole thing so far had seemed really strange. As I looked around, I saw no signs of her having kids. so I waited at the table for at least a good 5 minutes. I didn't know what was taking so long. Did she lose the phone or something? I decided to ask. I called out asking if she was okay, and she called back from the other room saying yes and it would just be a moment. So I kept sitting there, but then at least 5 more minutes went by. I was starting to feel nervous. It was just really strange. When she left the room, she didn't turn any other lights on either. I could barely see around the kitchen as it was. Eventually, I got impatient and I stood up. I walked to the end of the kitchen and to the entrance of what appeared to be the living room. There was no sign of the woman. I called out again, asking what was taking so long. This time, though, I got no response. I kept standing there looking into the living room, and there was a hallway at the end of it. It was really dark, like I said, but after standing there for like a minute, I thought I saw the woman cross the hallway. She did not bother to say anything or acknowledge me. This was really weird. I walked back into the kitchen. I thought about things, and then I decided to just leave. This whole situation was creeping me out, and I didn't know what was going on. So I walked over to the back door, left, and then walked back out to my car. When I did, I looked back at the house. I saw now that one of the lights was on in a front window which hadn't been before. The woman was looking out of that window and staring at me from inside. It just really creeped me out. I got back inside of my car and drove home. After that, I went and bought a cell phone from the store. This happened when I was about 10 or 11, camping with my mom near a river in the woods. It was just the two of us out there, no one else around. The nearest farmhouse was a couple of miles away, but we were mostly alone. We had the tent set up and a small campfire going when a little before dark, this man arrived to our site. The area we were in was open to anyone wanting to camp, so it wasn't strange to see somebody else, but he had no gear with him at all. He made conversation with us and eventually came around to warning us that there were wild dogs in the area that we needed to watch out for. My mom and I were slightly uncomfortable because he didn't leave and said that he would stay at the campsite a while to protect us from the wild dogs. My mom hinted several times that we would be fine and that he was free to leave because we didn't need his protection. But he didn't leave. He stayed a long time, but there wasn't much we could do because it was a public campsite. He had the right to be there if he wanted, even though he had no camping stuff with him. Eventually, my mom told the man that we were going into our tent for the night, thanked him for keeping us company, and said that he could leave and we would be fine. I asked my mom quietly if he was going to hurt us, and she said of course not, but I could tell by the way her voice cracked that she was scared too. We didn't want to provoke him, but we didn't want to make him feel like we were scared either. So we just crawled into our tent while the man kept sitting on a log at the fire pit. I don't think my mom slept that night, as she had a knife close to where she lay in the tent. I watched the man through the flap in the tent for a while. At one point, while sitting by the fire, he pulled out a long knife and started sharpening it on a stick. He just stared down at the blade and ran it along the stick, making these slow scraping sounds. I asked my mom if he was going to kill us, and she kept saying no, but I could tell that she was worried. She tried not to show it, but she was prepared for the worst. I eventually fell asleep, but woke up a lot to see my mom was still awake, lying there and listening to the scraping sound of the knife on the stick. By morning, the guy was gone. I wasn't sure how long he had stayed or when he left. After packing up our gear, we stopped by the nearest farmhouse to tell somebody about the strange man. At the farmhouse, the old man there listened to our story, then kind of chuckled and said, "Oh, that's just Ivan. He means well, just doesn't know how to mind his own business." Apparently, he lived on a farm nearby, and the old man promised us that he'd have another word with his neighbor, reminding him not to be so rude and strange. A few years later, after our camping trip where we had met Ivan, I saw something disturbing. I was watching the news, and a man had been arrested who was a suspect in several missing person cases. They showed his photo on TV, and even though it had been a few years ago, I instantly noticed it was the guy who had been with us at the campsite. His name was Ivan Milat, a serial killer who had been picking up hitchhikers along the highways and killing them, and burying their bodies in the woods right across the river from where we had camped. I can't even describe the way I felt when I realized it. The guy who had been lurking outside our tent, sharpening a knife, talking about wild dogs, had been a serial killer. We had come so close to him, and I had no idea at the time. I don't think I'll ever forget that night and how lucky we were. but it still haunts me. Experience. A couple of years ago, I bought a gaming computer on Facebook Marketplace. I've been wanting to buy one for a while, and I knew that they're typically very expensive. So that gave me the idea to go on Facebook Marketplace and look for a used one. After several days of looking, I found one that I wanted. I decided to reach out to the seller and ask a little more information about it. The seller was a guy named Jeremy. We went back and forth a little bit, and I decided that I wanted to buy it. It was a pretty good deal, so we agreed on a day that I would go over and get the computer. It also came with a monitor, keyboard, and mouse as well. So after I bought it, I took it home, set it up, and started using it. I was happy with my purchase, and I used the computer for the next week and a half. Then I got another message on Facebook from Jeremy. He said that he wanted his computer back. I was really confused when I saw this, because he had just sold it to me like a week before. He said that he changed his mind and wanted it back now. I didn't want to return it. I liked the computer, and I had already installed several games and other programs on it. I told Jeremy no, I wasn't going to return it. Then Jeremy said that he would give me a certain amount of money for it. The funny thing is that the amount he offered was less than I paid for the computer by a few $100s. I pointed that out, and he said that it was all he could afford to give. Now, when he originally said he wanted it back, I assumed that meant he would pay the full price. I said the answer was still no. I was really annoyed that this guy was trying to get the computer back, and even more annoyed that he wasn't offering the full price. If he didn't want to sell it, then he shouldn't have sold it. However, Jeremy was not happy that I refused to give the computer back. He then sent me a friend request on Facebook, and then started messaging me a bunch of times. I ignored him for a while, but after he kept sending me messages for like 3 days straight, I blocked him. I thought that was that. This situation was strange enough. But unfortunately, that was not the end of Jeremy. Probably about a week after I blocked Jeremy, he showed up to my house. I happened to be home alone and was in my bedroom, on the very gaming computer that I had bought from Jeremy. It was nighttime and about 8 p.m. and dark out. I heard a knocking coming from the front door. I got up and left my room and went over to the living room and then looked out of the window. Jeremy was there on the front step. I recognized him from when I bought the computer. How did he know where I lived? This was really strange. I watched him stand there and knock again on the front door. I was wondering what on earth he had planned. Did he think that by showing up at my house unannounced that would make me change my mind? I stayed in the living room and ignored his knocks. I was hoping that he would just go away, and most of the lights in my house were off, so maybe he would think that I wasn't home. But I watched Jeremy hang around the front step for several more minutes. I was kind of looking around, and I had to move back from the window so that he wouldn't see me. He came back and knocked again on the front door, this time louder. He also yelled, asking for me to come outside. I still ignored him. I walked back to my bedroom, hoping that Jeremy would eventually give up and leave. When I got back to my room, I put in some headphones and sat back down at my computer. For the next 5 minutes or so, everything was fine. But suddenly, I heard a knocking sound. I took out my headphones and looked to the direction of my window. Jeremy was standing there, looking into my bedroom. I got up and ran over to the window and closed the blinds. Jeremy started yelling at me, but I couldn't really hear what he said very well. I left my bedroom and went back towards the living room. By that time, Jeremy had made his way back towards my front door. Then he started banging on it again. I went over to the door and shouted to him that I was going to call the police. Jeremy yelled at me to give the computer back. Then I called the cops. I told them what was going on, and Jeremy still wasn't leaving, and he continued to stay there, even after I got off the phone with the police. But unfortunately, he finally left just moments before the cops got there. I talked to them, gave them a description of Jeremy, and told them my side of the story. After that, the police left and said to call back if Jeremy ever returned. I was afraid that he would, but luckily he didn't. I still have a hard time believing how crazy it was, and I can't believe that that actually happened.
Back in 2014, I joined a Facebook group that was started specifically for people who are from the town I grew up in Southern California. The whole group shared memories of the town, and everyone seemed nice, except for one person. There's always at least one asshole. This guy got on the bad side of one of the admins, whose name was Robert, and ended up being booted from the group. I'll note that I was in my mid-30s at the time, and most of the members were at least 20 years older than me. Robert was approaching 60 and was married with children who were about my age. Robert took a liking to me. Since he was married, I didn't think his friendship would go any further than that, but I was mistaken. He said that I was a down-to-earth girl and was easy to talk to. He and I exchanged phone numbers, and he would message me quite a bit. However, Robert took it a step further and found out where I lived, my landline number, and my mother's address in California. He had a subscription to one of those sites that contain information on people, their age, phone numbers, possible relatives, previous addresses, etc. He found out through Facebook when my birthday was, and he sent me flowers. I thanked him, but I started to get suspicious. His behavior was becoming alarming. He started complaining that all his wife wanted from him was his pain pills and money. Around this time, I met the man who would eventually become my husband, and of course, I announced it on Facebook. Robert went into a ballistic rage upon hearing this, saying that I should have known that he was in love with me. I told him, "You're married. Why are you in love with another woman?" He began texting me at least 10 to 20 times a day, going from calling me hateful names to profusely apologizing. I blocked his number, so he started blowing up my landline. Most of the time I kept it unplugged, so I didn't get most of the voicemails that he would leave. One day, out of curiosity, I did listen to some of the voicemails I got. In one of the messages, he claimed that I owed him $13,000. He then started making threats about how he would come to where I lived and would also pay my mother a visit. I blocked him on my landline and informed my mother about the situation. Robert got clever and started texting me from random numbers located all over California. He even sent letters to my home, and nothing he said in those letters made any sense. That's when I decided that I needed a restraining order. I tried twice through my county court, but since I lived in Washington State at the time, the judge wouldn't grant it since we lived in different states. Once Robert found out that I couldn't file a restraining order, he sent me more hateful messages and told me that I would never get rid of him. So I went back to court with the new messages. For this new hearing, Robert mailed in a letter of rebuttal. He claimed that he was a civil servant who had worked at a school district at one time and was an electrician by trade. He also said that he was on disability and couldn't drive longer for more than a half an hour without experiencing excruciating pain, and posed the question, how could he possibly come to Washington State? I told the judge that this wasn't true, because he openly posted all day about his motorcycle trips to Malibu on Facebook. Regardless of the evidence, I wasn't granted a restraining order, and I felt failed by the system. I blocked him on all social media, emails, and phone numbers, but he obviously would still call using new numbers. He made a duplicate Facebook page with my profile picture and sent out friend requests to all of my friends. He had my real Facebook profile blocked, and I found out when a friend messaged me, "I got a friend request from you, but I already thought we were friends." My friend then told me that this fake profile of mine was making all kinds of posts talking shit about me. My friend reported it, and thankfully Facebook took it down. I changed my cell phone number, and I eventually moved into a new place. Things died down for a while, but Robert somehow found me on LinkedIn. After that, I straight up deleted LinkedIn and Facebook, and I saw that he even followed me on my YouTube page. I don't know how to remove someone, so I just blocked him there. To wrap up this insane story, I've included a couple of recordings of the messages he left.
Hey, I need you to unblock me and respond to me, please. Would you consider doing that? That's the Christian thing to do, don't you think? Please, I'm not playing around. Bye. don't respond to me, you're not leaving me too many choices here, and there only leaves me one, and I don't want to do that, and I don't want to blindside you. I wish you would just talk to me. We could work this out, but obviously you don't want that. But you're not leaving me much of a choice, and I won't be going after a paycheck. Bye.
This is a story that took place back when I was a kid. I was probably somewhere between the ages of 8 and 10. At that age, I loved Christmas, mainly because of all the things that I would get. I lived with my parents, brother, and sister in a 2-story home in a typical neighborhood. Each year, we would do lots of decorating inside and outside of the house. Our Christmas tree would go in the corner of our living room, and all the presents would go underneath it. On Christmas Eve that year, we went to my grandparents' house, and then we were going to my uncle's on Christmas. That night, on Christmas Eve, after we all went to bed, I had a difficult time falling asleep. I usually did when I was a kid because I was always so excited for Christmas. I finally was able to doze off for a bit, but woke up sometime later when it was still the night. I remember just turning over to try to go back to sleep, but then I thought I heard a noise. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. My bedroom was the closest to the stairs, and even I could barely hear it. I looked at the clock, and it was 2 a.m. I didn't know why anybody would be up at this hour. Being that young and a curious kid, I decided to go and look. I left my bedroom and then walked a few feet to the railing of the stairs that overlooked the living room. I looked down, and everything seemed normal. All of the lights were off, but the lights from the Christmas tree and the few other decorations were on, so I could see a little bit. I looked down at the tree for a little while longer. It was very large, and we always got the biggest tree that we could find. But then I saw somebody come out from behind the tree. It wasn't my dad or brother, but a random guy that I didn't know. As soon as I realized that it was a random guy, I turned and ran. I went to the end of the hallway where my parents' bedroom was. I woke them up and told them that there was some guy in the house. I remember that my dad got up to look. He came back a short time later and said that he saw somebody leaving the house through the window. The police were called, and when they got out to our house, searched all over our property. They didn't find the guy, but they did find that our window was broken. None of us had heard it break, so the guy must have quietly done it somehow. It was a living room window that was broken, and I think that I saw him not long after he got in the house, because nothing was even stolen. I think that he either saw me or heard me, and that scared him off. I'm just really glad that he didn't try to come upstairs or anything. It still really freaked me out knowing that somebody broke in. It took me a long time to be able to fall back asleep, but eventually I was able to. That was by far my craziest Christmas experience. Nothing like that has happened since, much less on Christmas. I still don't know who the guy was though, and why he chose our house. I also don't know if the police ever found him. Something crazy happened when I was in high school. It was during my junior year, and a few months into the semester. I'm a female and was 17 at the time. One day, like any other, I went to school and it was my 4th hour class. Sometime during the hour, I remember that an announcement suddenly came over the intercom. We were told that the school was being locked down. Our teacher did all the things she was supposed to and locked the door and turned the lights off. Nobody really knew what was going on though. We all knew that it was not a drill, and everybody seemed a little bit worried. We all had no idea why the lockdown was happening. We just stayed in the room and things were very quiet for a while. After probably close to an hour, the lockdown finally ended. We were told that we would have the normal amount of passing time in the hallways, and then our final class of the day would be shorter than usual. So when we finally got let out of class, everybody was talking to each other about the lockdown. I was on my way back to my locker to drop my books off and get the ones for my next class. But before I could get there, I was pulled into the principal's office. I just remember that I saw the vice principal come up to me and ask if I could go with him. He said that I was not in trouble, so I followed him and we went to the principal's office. Then him and the principal both had me sit down and they told me what was going on. I was told that the school had been in a lockdown because a suspicious man had been seen inside the school during the class period. They went on to say that he was seen near the lockers but ran away when questioned. Unfortunately, he somehow left the school before the police got there and had escaped. The grounds were searched, and he was not on or near school property anymore. But when he was inside, he had opened one locker, which happened to be mine. He had brought a bolt cutter, which he had used to break open my locker. This obviously could have been used as a weapon as well, but the man unfortunately escaped with it. I was asked if I knew anybody who would do that or why, but I didn't know anyone. When they gave a basic description of the man to me, I had no idea who it was. I was really just as confused as anyone. I told them that I didn't know. After that, I looked through my locker and nothing appeared stolen. I didn't really have much in there except for my books for school. So after that, the school day resumed. My parents got called, and when the school day was over, nobody seemed to know why the guy would do that. However, later on, something else occurred. It was that very same night. I remember that I was in my bedroom, which was at the back of our house. I was on my bed, just on my phone. But when I glanced out of the window randomly, I happened to notice something. It looked like somebody was walking through the backyard. I got up and moved over to the window. When I got a closer look, sure enough, there was a man there. I did not know who he was, but I noticed that he was walking towards me. I quickly ducked down so that he wouldn't see me. I then moved away from the window and hoped that the man would not approach it. But moments later, I saw him appear right on the other side and look in. I quickly ran out of my bedroom and found my parents. I wasn't sure if the man had directly seen me or not. Most of the lights in my room were off, other than one small lamp. I told my parents what was going on, and they looked out of a different window to the backyard. Then they called the police. My dad kept an eye on the guy out the window. The rest of us went to the front of the house. The police were really quick to respond. Within probably 5 minutes, they were there. And when they got there, the man was still prowling around the backyard. After they entered the back, the man tried running away. He made it out of our backyard, but not much farther. He ended up being caught. And we soon found out that it was the same man who had been at the school earlier. I didn't know who he was, but somehow it appeared as though he was stalking me. The whole thing was really crazy. I'm just glad that the guy was caught. I don't know what would have happened. It started one Saturday afternoon when I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through social media. I switched to a new phone and a new number a few months ago. My old number was still active, but I didn't think much of it because it had been quiet. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, and when I looked down, I saw it was a text from my old number. The message read, "I see you." It was odd because I thought it was just some spam or a wrong number, so I shrugged it off. A few hours later, another message came through saying, "You don't remember me?" I had forgotten to change my number on a few accounts, so it was possible that somebody had gotten a hold of it. I decided to reply, trying to keep it light, and I typed back, "Who is this?" The response was quick and said, "You know who I am." I didn't want to engage further, so I put my phone down and tried to watch a movie, but the messages nagged at the back of my mind. The next day, the texts continued, saying more creepy and odd things. I stopped replying for a while. Monday brought more messages, saying things such as, "I'm closer than you think," and "You'll remember me soon." I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? Somebody is texting me creepy things from my old number? It felt ridiculous. By Tuesday, I was on edge, and I couldn't focus at work. The messages were escalating, saying, "I know what you did last summer," and kept repeating, "You'll remember soon." I tried to block the number, but it kept coming through, so I finally decided to involve the police and see if they could do anything. I explained the situation, and they filed a report. The messages continued for all the next week, and I tried to ignore them as best as I could. I finally got a call from the police a week later. They had traced the text back to an old acquaintance from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. He had been using some sort of app to send the messages from my old number. That night, I confronted him at his house, and his parents answered the door, so it ended up working out perfectly to involve them as well. It was awesome to see his face when he came downstairs and saw me talking to his parents and showing texts that he had sent to me. So that was the last problem I had with the kid, but it was still scary before I knew who was behind it all. Something weird happened to me last week. I was having a movie night by myself in my apartment. I live alone and on the second floor. My apartment building is fairly new, and I really like it. The place I live in has 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen. I was on my second movie of the night, and the time was about midnight. It was Saturday, so I didn't have work or anything the next morning. My apartment happened to be on the far end of the hallway, and it was right next to the stairs that people would occasionally use. The elevator was in the center of the hallway, which is much more common for people to use. I heard the door to the stairs open and then close. It sounded like somebody was walking by down the hallway, and I didn't think anything of it, but I realized soon that it sounded like more than 1 person, maybe almost 10. I thought it was a little weird, but expected them all to pass by. It seemed like they all stopped right outside of my doorway though. Maybe they were going to the place across the hall from me. The apartment across the hall though was not lined up with my door, but was a little ways down. I just got curious for some reason, so I paused the movie and got up. I walked over to the door and looked out the peephole. What I saw shocked me. There was like 10 guys standing in the hallway right outside my apartment, and they were all facing my door. I was instantly creeped out. I didn't know who any of these guys were, and they were all wearing all black and had hoods on, so I couldn't see much of their faces. This was really bizarre, to say the least. Nobody had knocked on my door though, and it didn't seem as though they were going to. They were just standing there. I considered for only a second opening the door and asking what was going on, but I thought better of it. I quickly walked away and decided to just ignore them. Still, I couldn't feel comfortable as long as they were all standing there. I was hoping and sort of expecting them all to move along and to keep walking away down the hallway. I listened for them to move away, but they didn't. I waited for a little longer before unpausing the movie, but I still didn't hear them walking away. The guys had to all still be there. I tried to distract myself by watching the film, but in doing so, I turned the volume down significantly. I didn't want the people outside to hear or know that I was home. As the movie played though, I still couldn't focus. It wasn't helping to distract me from the strange men standing outside my door. Then, I heard what I was sure sounded like my doorknob turning. It was very quiet, and the only reason I had heard it was because number 1, I was already thinking about the guys at the door, and number 2, my TV volume was now very quiet. This made me feel really creeped out, even more than I already was. I also started to feel like possibly I was in danger. I stayed where I was, not sure of what to do. For the next probably 10 minutes, I didn't hear any other noises or anything. I got up to see if the men were gone, and I was really hoping that they were. When I got to the door and looked out though, they were all still there. I ran back as quietly as possible. I sat back down on my couch and had no clue what to do in this situation. I didn't think I could call the police for this. They were just standing in my hallway. Yes, I thought they tried opening my door, but it's not like they were trying over and over or banging on the door. Looking back, I probably should have, but I was just hoping I wouldn't have to. After maybe 5 more minutes or so, I went back to look again. This time, when I looked out, they were all gone. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even heard them walking away or anything. I was so paranoid that I kept looking back out my peephole every 10 minutes or so. Luckily, I didn't see them. But before going to bed, I was so worried about it that I left my apartment and walked the hallways, just making sure that the men were gone. I went throughout the whole entire building just about, without seeing them. After that, I was finally able to go to bed. By now, it was past 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was really tired. I fell asleep pretty quickly. However, at some point, I was woken up in the night. I just remember waking up to the sounds of somebody knocking on my front door. They knocked about 2 times after I woke up. I knew it was probably the same guys, and I was terrified. I stayed in my bed and didn't even bother to get up. What could I do? Then, there was just silence. I was afraid they would break in or something. I couldn't believe that they were back, if that's in fact who was at the door. I really didn't want to get up and check though. I laid there in my bed for the longest time. It was probably about 30 minutes or so. I finally looked at the clock and saw that it was almost 4 a.m. Then I got up and checked the door. Nobody was outside in the hallway though. Whoever had knocked was gone. I went back to sleep after that and heard nothing more. Since then, everything's been fine. This story happened when I was in college. I was a graduate student living on campus about an hour away from my parents' house. When the week of Thanksgiving came, I went home after classes on Monday. We had the whole rest of the week off, so I would be staying at my parents' house for a little while. When I got back home, the second day, during the night, I was sleeping in my bedroom when I was awoken. Now, my bedroom is on the first floor, and it's on the front side of the house. It was the middle of the night, and I thought that I heard the sound of a knocking on my window. It was really creepy. I sat up in bed and looked over to the window. There was a curtain covering it, so I couldn't really see anything. I did not hear the knocking again, so I got up, walked over to the window, and looked out of it. When I looked around the yard, everything seemed fine, and I didn't notice anything. I still didn't know what made the sound, though. I went back to my bed and sat down, still looking in the direction of the window. That's when I saw something move past the window only for a brief second. I couldn't see any details because I really just saw the shadow from the other side of the curtains, but somebody had definitely walked past outside. I got up again, ran over to the window, and looked out. Whoever it was gone again. I glanced all around the yard of what I could see, but I never saw anything at all. I went back to my bed again and sat back down and didn't see anything for the next few minutes. I didn't know exactly what was going on. After it seemed like things were back to normal, I tried to go back to sleep again. I laid down and closed my eyes. A few minutes later, when I was starting to fall asleep, I heard knocking again on the window. There was no mistaking it. I sat up and saw that somebody was right outside. I couldn't tell who they were because my curtains were still closed. I could just see like a silhouette of their figure. It looked to be a man. Then I heard what sounded like a faint laughter coming from the other side of the window. It was really creepy. I turned on all of the lights to my bedroom and then saw the guy finally moving away. He left my sight, and when I got to the window, he was gone again. Somebody was definitely messing with me, but I didn't know who or why. I stayed up for quite a while before finally was able to go back to sleep. The next day, I told my parents about it. We were unsure of what could be done. There were no signs of an attempted break-in. I couldn't even give a description of the man. We just hoped that it wouldn't happen again. The next day went by as normal, but that night I stayed up late watching TV in the living room with my parents. It was a little bit after midnight when we all heard a noise coming from the other room. We all got up at once and went over to a window. From there, though, we couldn't see anything. We heard the noise again. Now it was more clear that somebody was hitting my bedroom window. We called the police and then moved as far to the other side of the house as we could. We heard another noise. After that, things were quiet for a while. The police arrived really fast, though. When they got there, they found a man hiding in our backyard. None of us knew who he was. The guy had been trying to break into our house through my bedroom window. The window hadn't even broke, though, but there were some marks on it. I'm really glad that he didn't get in. I'm also really glad that I was not in my bedroom at the time, but with my parents in the living room. It had to be the same guy who had been there the night before. Since this happened, every year when I go back to my parents for Thanksgiving, we joke around about it. At the time, it wasn't so funny though, and I'm really glad that everyone is okay. This is something that happened back when I was a freshman in high school. I'm also a female, and this was about 10 years ago now. So the story begins when I got this friend request from a random guy on Facebook. I looked at his profile and saw that he appeared to be around my age, and we did have a couple of mutual friends. His profile said he went to a different high school, but it was one that was nearby in just the next city over from mine. I accepted the friend request because of this, and I was also slightly curious of how the guy knew about me. For the most part, he looked like a pretty typical kid though. Not long after I accepted his friend request, he sent me a message saying hi. I said hi back to him, and we started having a basic conversation. I don't recall everything said, but the conversation continued into the next day. I remember that's when he asked me if I wanted to hang out with him. Now, I had only just met him, and we went to different schools. He seemed nice to that point from talking, and I almost said yes, but then I ended up saying no at that point because I just didn't know him well enough yet. He said maybe some other time, and I said yes to that, but not making any official plans. For the rest of that day and into the next, we continued to talk on and off. Well, the next day, later on, after I got home from school, he told me that he was going to come to my house and pick me up. Once more, I did not feel comfortable to hang out with the guy yet. I told him that I would not be able to, but he didn't respond to me for a while. About 20 minutes later or so, he told me to come outside, saying that he was there. I got a bad feeling about it, and also realized now that this guy must be at least 16 years old if he was driving around. I walked over to the front of the house and saw that there was a car parked out on the side of the street. It was a red 4-door sedan that was kind of old looking. However, the windows were rather tinted and I could not see inside. I was really surprised that he had driven all the way to my house. At first, I felt kind of bad for him to drive all that way and not hang out with him. We had been talking for a few days and most likely he wouldn't be a bad guy, so I almost walked outside and got into his car. But my parents were also home, and I would have to tell them where I was going, and I didn't think they would want me to go with this guy. After thinking about it for a minute or two, I decided not to go. When I said maybe we'd hang out another time, I didn't mean just drive to my house. He texted me on Facebook a couple more times, urging me to go outside already. I told him that I had some other place to go though, which wasn't true, but I didn't know what else to say. Eventually, he said okay, and he drove off. After he left though, I got the realization that I never told him my address. It sort of creeped me out that he knew where I lived. I didn't know how he would know this. We did have mutual friends on Facebook, so possibly he knew one of my friends and asked them. Either way, I was much less comfortable even talking with this guy anymore. However, despite that very same night he continued to send me messages. I remember that this was several hours later, probably 9 or 10 at night. He asked me where I was and what I was doing. I told him that I was just in my room doing homework, which I was. After that, he did not respond right away. I don't remember what assignment I was doing, but I was pretty focused on it. I sat at my desk in the corner of my bedroom. About 20 minutes later though, I heard this car driving down the street slowly outside. My bedroom was at the front end of the house, and I could see out to the street. We also lived in a pretty quiet neighborhood, and at this hour, it was rare for somebody to drive past. So hearing a car driving slowly just got my attention for some reason. I remember lifting up the blinds and glancing out the window. When I did, I saw this car moving very slowly and sort of pulling over to the side of the street, across from our house and a little ways down. That's when I realized this was the same red car with the tinted windows. I looked back to Facebook, but there were still no new messages. He hadn't told me that he was coming over again, and he didn't tell me to come outside either. I was expecting him to tell me again that he was there and to go with him like before, but he didn't. As the car continued to just sit there outside on the side of the street running, I kept an eye on it. After several more minutes, the driver's door opened. I saw a man get out, but it wasn't some 16-year-old kid. It was a grown man, probably like 40. He got out and started walking in the direction of our house. At this point, I quickly got up and ran out of my bedroom. I went towards the living room, and luckily my parents were both still up and in the living room. I didn't have time to tell them the whole story, but I alerted them of the guy walking. My dad got up and went over to the door. I looked through the front window, and by now the man was walking on the side of the street towards our house. My dad went over to the front door and opened it. When he did, the man kept walking farther away down the street, in the opposite direction of his car. My dad actually went outside and followed the guy, calling for him to stop. But at that point, the guy took off running. My dad did not run after him and came back inside. That's when I told my parents the whole story of how I thought I was talking to a kid my age, and also how he just showed up without me giving him my address. My parents called the police at that point, and my dad went and stood outside in the front door, seeing if the guy would head back for his car because it was still there. When the police arrived, the man was still nowhere in sight. They spoke with us, and then went out and looked for the man. He had to show up eventually because of his car, and when he did, the police got him. After that, I learned a valuable lesson about Facebook and social media. I was much more careful with who I talked to online for the rest of my high school career. So me and my friends used to have this group chat that was mostly for sending stupid memes. Occasionally we'd talk about hanging out, but it was always the same thing. People would say, yeah, for sure, and then never actually hang out. The group was me, Emily, David, and Ryan. Ryan was your typical guy, always getting into weird situations and trouble. He was constantly meeting sketchy people on eBay or Craigslist, trying to make a quick buck off random stuff he had lying around. One day, Ryan was selling his four-wheeler and asked us to come with him because he didn't trust the buyer. We told him, if you don't trust him, why sell it to him in the first place? But Ryan didn't get what we were trying to say. He barely even acknowledged that it was a red flag. We were all confused as to why he wasn't seeing what seemed obvious to us. We told him to just leave it and wait until he could find a more trustworthy buyer, but he didn't listen. He told us the deal was on the south side of the city, which was the sketchiest area imaginable. That side of town was notorious for crime and kidnappings. That was the biggest red flag of all. None of us wanted to go, but Ryan wouldn't listen. Throughout the day, he was snapping us updates about getting his stuff ready and making progress on the sale. I messaged one of the other friends in the group chat privately and told them, I don't think we should let him go over there. They replied, why not? He's a grown man. If he gets into trouble, that's on him. We warned him. I thought that was a pretty stupid reason to abandon a friend who might get himself into serious trouble. No one else was listening to me though, and they insisted I was overreacting. They said if Ryan needed to learn a lesson, then so be it. Hours went by, and Ryan was at the person's house. We kept checking up on him because, like I said, the whole thing felt wrong. He kept snapping us back, reassuring us that everything was fine and that we were overreacting. But still, we couldn't relax until we knew he was safe. Then he sent a snap of himself in a basement. We all thought, why are you in their basement? Someone even commented, what are you doing down there? But he didn't respond, which was really odd. I figured maybe he was busy talking to the buyer and just wanted to update us. But then he snapped another picture from a different room in the basement. It was getting weirder and weirder each snap. Still, we ignored it because we figured if he was snapping us, he must be okay. The next snap was in a dark room showing someone's feet, but they weren't Ryan's feet. That's when we realized someone else had taken Ryan's phone and had been snapping us the whole time, pretending everything was fine. We started panicking. We tried to check his location, but the person who had his phone turned it off. We knew something was seriously wrong and that we needed to act fast, but we didn't know what to do. We tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. We thought about contacting his family, but none of us knew them. We were stuck. Someone suggested driving to the area to try to find his car, but we knew that could take hours and maybe even days, and it wasn't a guaranteed plan because we didn't even know the location. The next snap came in and I nearly lost it. It was a photo of fresh blood on the floor, wet, bright red, and horrifying. We all froze. That's when we realized we weren't just overreacting. Something terrible had happened. We immediately FaceTimed each other and tried calling the police from someone else's phone. But without any concrete evidence or location, we couldn't do much. We were completely out of luck. We all went to bed that night, frantic and unable to sleep. Days and weeks passed, and we didn't hear a thing from Ryan. Then, about 6 months later, we saw his face on the news. He'd been reported missing. I thought to myself, if we had just gone with him or stopped him, maybe we could have done something. After months of searching, the police gave up. Then, out of nowhere, someone found Ryan walking down the highway in nothing but his underwear and shoes. He looked starved, barely alive. When we finally got the full story in the group chat, we couldn't believe what had happened. To be honest, I can't even talk about it. It's too gruesome and traumatizing. I'm just glad that Ryan is alive.